Hello friends, the United Nations has made significant efforts in ensuring that countries are held responsible for serious violations against children during armed conflicts. Recently, they included Israel in the list of nations and entities that have severely violated children's rights. This highlights the seriousness of the situation in the Palestine. Israel is now grouped with Russia and notorious terrorist outfits such as ISIS or ISIS, Al Qaeda, and Boko Haram. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, personally notified the Israeli army's attaché in Washington about this decision, indicating the increasing global worry for the vulnerable situation of children affected by the Israeli genocide in Palestine. There is no other word for it, it is genocide. The Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict compiles an annual report that serves as a critical document for identifying parties responsible for serious violations against children in armed conflict. These violations cover a broad spectrum of heinous acts such as the murder and injury of children, sexual violence, and assaults on schools and hospitals. These actions are considered war crimes according to international law. The report has a significant impact in highlighting the most serious wrongdoers, ensuring they face consequences. This also encourages the building up of international pressure on the wrongdoers. Being blacklisted by the United Nations has far-reaching consequences that go beyond mere symbolism. The international community will closely monitor, apply diplomatic pressure, and potentially impose sanctions on the countries and entities. The blacklisting could damage Israel's standing on the global stage and create tension in its diplomatic relations with other nations and organizations. It is yet to be determined how this development will affect diplomatic relationships, trade agreements, and participation in international forums, as it depends on the reactions of individual nations and global bodies. Equating Israel with notorious terrorist organizations like ISIS and Al Qaeda, etc., could damage its international reputation, overshadowing its military actions and human rights record. The UN scrutiny is not solely directed towards Israel. The annual blacklist now includes Russian forces as they have been found guilty of violating children's rights in the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. The report brings attention to severe violations against children in Ukraine in 2022. These include the deliberate killing of both boys and girls as well as attacks on schools and hospitals. These actions are categorized as war crimes under international law. Russia's international standing could be affected by the decision to blacklist their forces because of these atrocities. Being on the blacklist signals condemnation and scrutiny from the global community, potentially affecting diplomatic relations, trade agreements, and Russia's participation in international organizations. However, the specific impact will depend on how other countries and international bodies respond to this development. Although the UN primarily focuses on blacklisting countries and entities in conflict zones, the repercussions can also indirectly impact their citizens. If Russia receives negative attention, it could impact public opinion within the country and potentially result in heightened scrutiny of Russia's human rights record. The outcome of this scrutiny could have an impact on international relations and travel restrictions for Russian citizens. The United Nations has an extensive history of implementing sanctions against different nations for breaching of international law and human rights. The list of nations that have faced these sanctions includes Southern Rhodesia, South Africa, the former Yugoslavia, Haiti, Angola, Liberia, Iran, Somalia, Iraq, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Sudan, Lebanon, North Korea, Libya, Guinea-Bissau, the Central African Republic, Yemen, South Sudan, and Mali, among others. The United Nations follows specific criteria and procedures when blacklisting countries or entities primarily targeting severe violations of international humanitarian and human rights laws, especially during times of conflict. The UN, through agencies such as the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the United Nations Children's Fund, investigates allegations of violations. Annual reports on children and armed conflict play a crucial role in this process. The gathered information is verified through multiple sources, including on the ground investigations, reports from non governmental organizations, and other UN bodies. The UN creates lists of state and non-state actors for serious violations like killing and injuring children, sexual violence, kidnapping, attacks on educational and medical facilities, blocking humanitarian aid, and involving children in armed conflicts using verified data. The lists are published in annual reports submitted to the UN Security Council and General Assembly. Countries that find themselves on the UN blacklist are subject to greater scrutiny and diplomatic pressure. The consequences may include the imposition of economic sanctions, travel bans, and freezing of assets. Moreover, countries that are blacklisted may experience a decrease or complete halt in international aid and developmental assistance, strained relationships with other nations, and diminished influence in global discussions. The act of blacklisting a country tarnishes its international standing, branding it as a violator of human rights and international law. The presence of this stigma can have a ripple effect on foreign investments and international partnerships, intensifying the economic and diplomatic fallout. The main purpose of blacklisting is to ensure accountability and prevent future abuses, but individuals from blacklisted countries can suffer adverse effects. The combination of sanctions and reduced international aid can have adverse effects on the economy, including inflation, shortages of goods, and higher levels of unemployment. Citizens may also encounter challenges in obtaining visas or traveling abroad because of their country's negative reputation. Sanctions can also affect access to vital services and humanitarian aid, especially in areas of conflict. The recent addition of Israel to the UN blacklist for its involvement in child rights violations during armed conflicts brings up several important points. There will be increased monitoring and reporting of Israel's military actions, focusing on the ones that impact civilians and children. International observers will watch for any more breaches, exerting considerable pressure on Israel to exercise restraint and abide by international laws and norms. This choice has the potential to strain diplomatic relations and result in sanctions, although the specific reactions from different countries may vary. Different nations have the option to either impose economic or political actions against Israel or pursue a more balanced strategy involving diplomatic pressure and enhanced monitoring. Since Israel is being placed in the same category as Russia, ISIS, and Al Qaeda, it will have consequences for its international standing and how people view it. The perception of Israel as a responsible player in the region by the global community could be damaged, possibly resulting in isolation. According to UNICEF, between 2014 and 2021, over 3,000 Palestinian children were killed and many more injured because of the conflict in Gaza, a staggering toll on innocent lives. The UN verified that in 2022 alone, over 700 children were killed or maimed because of the conflict in Ukraine. Schools and hospitals have been frequent targets, exacerbating the already dire humanitarian crisis. The conflict in Yemen, involving multiple parties, has seen rampant violations against children. The UN reports that between 2015 and 2021, over 10,000 children were killed or maimed. The blacklisting of parties involved in Yemen's conflict has led to some international pressure and sanctions, though with mixed effectiveness in curbing the abuses. After being blacklisted, South Sudan has faced international sanctions and diplomatic isolation, putting immense pressure on the regime to address the grave violations committed against children. In response, the country has taken some steps towards addressing child recruitment and the use of children in armed conflict, showcasing a potential path for positive change influenced by UN actions and international pressure. The blacklisting of nations by the United Nations for committing atrocities against children in armed conflicts is a crucial measure in ensuring accountability and preventing future abuses. The repercussions of being blacklisted, which include diplomatic, economic, and reputational consequences, serve as a powerful statement to the global community regarding the seriousness of these violations. Although the primary aim is to encourage adherence to international laws regarding humanitarian and human rights, we cannot overlook the unintended consequences on individuals from countries on the blacklist. Vulnerable populations could experience increased suffering because of potential consequences, such as economic hardships, travel restrictions, and limited access to essential services and humanitarian aid. This should additionally pressure the concerned governments, forcing them to mend their ways. The international community may have to find a balance between holding those responsible accountable and minimizing the impact on innocent civilians as they navigate these complex situations. By employing diplomatic initiatives, implementing targeted sanctions, and providing humanitarian aid, it is possible to ease the challenges faced by citizens, all while exerting pressure on non compliant countries to adhere to international laws and norms. The primary focus should be on safeguarding the lives and well being of children who are caught in the middle of violent conflicts, even as efforts are made to hold those responsible for any wrongdoing accountable.